Good to have you here. This is Unintended Consequences, episode 38, for June 23rd, 2026. Today's case is a reminder that complex systems rarely respond the way we expect them to. Mosquito nets built to save millions from malaria are instead being cut into fishing gear that empties lakes and leaks insecticide into the water. In fishing villages along the shores of Lake Victoria, women once received rectangular insecticide-treated nets at health clinics to hang over their children's beds. The nets arrived as single large rectangles, sized to cover an entire sleeping area, and the insecticide was already embedded in the fibers rather than sprayed on later. Within weeks, many of those same nets were being sliced into smaller panels, weighted with stones, and dragged through the shallows at dawn. A household that received one net could divide it into 3 or 4 separate pieces, each small enough to be handled by 1 or 2 people, yet still large enough to sweep a useful stretch of water. The intervention that public health researchers had ranked among the cheapest ways to prevent malaria deaths was now removing juvenile fish before they could reproduce. It was also releasing small pulses of insecticide into the same waters where people drew drinking water and washed clothes. The polyethylene threads that had been engineered to keep mosquitoes out at night were now being used in daylight to keep even the smallest fish from slipping through. The modern insecticide-treated net emerged from research programs in the 1980s and 1990s. Those programs sought an intervention simple enough to reach rural households without functioning health systems. Instead of requiring daily pills or repeated house visits by spray teams, a net could be handed out once and then left in place. Organizations including the World Health Organization and UNICEF promoted the nets after randomized trials showed they could cut child mortality from malaria by roughly 15 to 20% in areas of stable transmission. If 800,000 children were dying each year, a 15% reduction would mean roughly 120,000 fewer deaths. A 20% reduction would mean roughly 160,000 fewer deaths. At the time, malaria still killed an estimated 800,000 children each year, almost all in sub-Saharan Africa. Earlier spraying campaigns had faltered because of cost, logistics, and growing resistance to DDT. A single spray round might protect a house for only a few months, and organizing teams to revisit thousands of villages repeatedly proved expensive and difficult to sustain. Distributing a physical product that families could use without daily action appeared both technically effective and politically feasible. By the early 2000s, major donors had committed hundreds of millions of dollars to free or heavily subsidized net campaigns. They framed the effort as a rare public health success measured in lives saved rather than behavior changed. Between 2004 and 2015, more than 1 billion long-lasting insecticidal nets were distributed across Africa. That is roughly 90 million nets per year across the 11-year window. Large-scale programs reached the shores of both Lake Victoria and Lake Tanganyika. In western Kenya and along the Tanzanian and Ugandan coasts, health workers recorded household coverage rates above 70% within a few years. Early evaluations documented sharp drops in malaria cases and parasite prevalence in children. Proponents pointed to cost-effectiveness figures that placed nets among the best buys in global health, sometimes under $50 per life saved. A few fisheries researchers noted that the polyethylene netting was stronger and finer than traditional papyrus or sisal gear. Those observations remained in specialized journals and did not alter distribution targets. In lakeside communities where fish stocks had already declined from commercial trawling and population growth, the new nets offered an immediate, zero-cost alternative to buying commercial gear. A family that could no longer afford factory-made gill nets or beach signs could instead take the treated net they had received for free and repurpose it the same morning. Families discovered that a single treated net could be cut into 3 or 4 smaller panels, each usable for weeks before the insecticide lost potency. Because the mesh was designed to stop mosquitoes, it also captured fingerlings and small cichlids that traditional nets had allowed to escape. Traditional papyrus or sisal nets had larger openings that let the youngest fish pass through. The polyethylene mesh, by contrast, retained almost everything. As catches of juvenile fish rose, the breeding population shrank. This reduced future yields and pushed fishers farther from shore or into deeper water. Insecticide residues washed into the lake during repeated use, adding low-level chemical pressure to an already stressed aquatic system. Public health workers who returned for follow-up visits found fewer nets hanging in bedrooms. Some households reported they had lost the nets to fishing, making it harder to justify fresh distributions. The same durability that made the nets last 3 to 5 years under a bed made them last long enough in water to become standard equipment for an entire generation of small-scale fishers. By the late 2000s, fisheries departments in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda began issuing warnings against using treated nets for fishing. Some districts experimented with confiscations. Health programs responded by printing messages on new nets reminding users they were intended for sleeping. They also tested alternative fishing gear subsidies. Yet uptake remained low because the mosquito nets were still free. In a few locations, communities received both fishing nets and malaria nets in coordinated visits. Logistics proved difficult, and coverage numbers for malaria protection slipped. Today, treated nets continue to be distributed at scale while lake fisheries remain under pressure. Researchers estimate that in some bays of Lake Victoria, more than 20% of households own at least one net that has been used in the water. No large-scale reversal of the distribution strategy has occurred. The tension between protecting children from malaria and protecting the lakes that feed those same children persists. When a single object is given away to solve one urgent problem, its material properties will be tested against every other pressing need in the household. Complex systems, whether lakes or village economies, absorb the new object and rearrange themselves around it. They often do so in ways that no single sector model predicted. The durable, fine mesh that made nets life-saving also made them the best available fishing tool once fish became scarce. Designers who want to limit harmful repurposing must therefore ask not only whether the product works for its intended use, they must also ask whether it will remain the cheapest or strongest option for every other urgent task people face. How might today's climate or health interventions shift once communities discover secondary uses no planner anticipated? That's unintended consequences for today. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend who'd appreciate the story. Subscribe wherever you listen, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And before you go, this show is part of the Nair Network, a family of daily podcasts covering tech, science, markets, and more. If you enjoyed today's episode, give Modern Investing Techniques a listen. Modern strategies for Canadian and US investors. You can explore the whole lineup at neuronetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.